So in this segment, we're going to be covering Facebook and one of the biggest bans that they have ever done. And, normally when you think bans, you think, okay, this person they banned him for hate speech, or they banned this guy because we disagreed politically, or, something that bothered Facebook's terms of use and was in a certain way. Somebody gets banned or a small group gets banned, whatever it may be. This, though, is an entire country being banned or partially censored and blocked. And what it has to do with is their news organizations. Anything related to news, gone. After this happened, users got on Facebook in Australia, couldn't find anything related to news content, and even some other categories that got swept up in the mix. So, to understand why this ban occurred, we need to back up a little bit. So last year, Australia decided to implement this news bargaining code. I think that was the name of it. I'll put it down in the description so you can take a look at what this policy would actually do. But essentially, the purpose of it was to give news media outlets, compensation for their articles, because they weren't receiving compensation from Google and Facebook from a lot of the news stories that they would post. And here's why. The way Google and Facebook work is, people get on there, they either search for content or they scroll for content, and when they search for the right thing or it recommends a certain thing, the news story will be posted and people can see the headline and part of the article there. And a lot of times you can get the gist of the story from looking at just that. While it may not be, enough details to really know a lot, people were looking at these news stories, getting their little bit of information and moving on. They were never, a lot of people were never click on the site at all. They just look at it and move on. The problem with that is these news sites felt that, people were consuming their content and they were not getting paid, because when someone doesn't click on the actual site itself, Google receives all the ad revenue from them, scrolling through the news stories. Same with Facebook. And if the person doesn't actually click and leave the site and go to the news site, Google or Facebook is receiving all the ad revenue there. Well, that was a problem for these news organizations, because they're like, hey, we created these stories, they're out there, you're using them to get views on your sites. We're not getting any compensation for this. So this policy was meant to, force Google and Facebook to pay these news organizations for the content that they host on their platform. And Google ended up complying with it. However, Facebook reacted very differently. Facebook was not having any of it, and they decided, we're going to go the other way and just ban all news content. And in this giant sweeping net of a ban that they did, not only did they ban news content, they banned emergency service information, they banned COVID-19 and vaccine information, they banned charities, nonprofits, news organizations that actually were based in the UK that they thought were Australian news sources, and much, much more. They banned a lot of stuff. So these different users throughout Australia hop onto their phones, check their Facebook feed, and are alerted that there are no posts and almost nothing on there for them to check. And it's absolutely nuts. And whether or not you disagree or agree with, Australia's policy that they wanted Facebook to pay for these articles, that's a whole nother debate to have. But what's interesting, though, that I want to look at here is Facebook's response and this heavy ban hammer they have, laid down on Australia. This is crazy. This is big. It just shows what kind of, steps they're willing to take and how much power they're willing to, exert on someone that they're disagreeing with and isn't wanting to comply by the rules they want them to comply. So we're going to take a look at just how extreme the censorship has gotten, right? Because we've seen problems in the past. People with certain political views, at least in the United States, have been banned or censored or blocked or demonetized, whatever it may be, because Facebook deems their content harmful. And there's been problems with this. We know about all of Section 230 and the argument of whether Facebook, is a platform where people can get on and do whatever, they want. It's a free, open place for them to talk, discuss things, run businesses, and it's become that, right? I mean, a lot of businesses operate through Facebook. It's no longer just a little place where you get on and, post little comments to each other. It's become an entire network of businesses and other things. It's grown to a very large point. And, they have certain protections being a platform, but they also act like they're a publisher, and they choose what content they want on there and what content they don't. They got the trash bin over here and the keep bin over here, and they're sorting through things as they go, which is weird. So they're kind of like a double standard with their protections. But most of you probably already know all that. We've talked about it multiple times. It's just crazy, though, that we haven't seen them go to this extent before in this large of a ban. And again, I want to bring this to something we've discussed before on here. Maybe you have seen this video or listened to this before, maybe you haven't. And I'm not a lawyer or have studied law, so I don't know entirely about this, but it does remind me of the company towns of back in the 1900s and before, where you had companies that owned entire towns, and people lived in them and businesses operated in them, but they were all owned, like that the town was owned by a company. And you had this one Supreme Court case, and this is very interesting. You'll see how it maybe connects, and it's a good question to maybe address. The court case of Marsh v. Alabama, 1946. I'll go ahead and read it to you here, and you can follow along. In Marsh v. Alabama, the Supreme Court held that a person distributing religious literature on the sidewalk of a company town was protected by First Amendment rights of freedom of the press and religion and could not be arrested for trespass because a Jehovah's Witness was arrested for passing out religious literature in a company town without a permit. So the company town, is, they say here, is largely a thing of the past, but in the early 1920s, much of the U.S. coal mining population lived in company-owned homes, as did many southern cotton mill workers. Company towns are comprised of a small but not insignificant percentage of traditional public space. Around this time, the Gulf Shipbuilding Corporation built homes for its workers, streets, sewers, and a downtown business district in Chickasaw, Alabama. Gulf did not prohibit individuals from neighboring areas from entering Chickasaw, driving on its streets, and shopping in the business district. So outside people were allowed to come in and do business with this place. It wasn't restricted to only people who resided in the company town. It was like a regular town almost, right? So you got Grace Marsh, a Jehovah's Witness, begins passing out religious literature on the sidewalk in front of the post office. However, she was told that she would not be given a permit to distribute the literature, and she was asked to leave. Marsh refused, and she was arrested and charged under state law for trespass on the Gulf property. Marsh's conviction was affirmed by the state and the Alabama Supreme Court. In the trial court and throughout the appellate process, Marsh argued that her individual constitutional rights of freedom of the press and freedom of religion should not be trumped by private property owners' rights to exclude. The court ended up finding that the company town functioned like a public town, and that's what's important here, the comparison. The U.S. Supreme Court examined the manner in which the Gulf-owned property functioned in the community. Writing for a 5-3 majority, Justice Hugo Black noted that, quote, "The more an owner for his advantage opens up his property for use by the public in general, the more do his rights become circumscribed by the statutory and constitutional rights of those who use it." The court continued, "Whether a corporation or municipality owns or possesses the town, the public in either case has an identical interest in the functioning of the community in such a manner that the channels of communication remain free." Accordingly, the court reversed Marsh's conviction, concluding the state could not use the trespass law to punish her. Okay, and it goes on. So, essentially, with this case, we're looking at this company so big, it has a whole town, it creates a whole community, and there's businesses within this community that they even own some of, and they own the entire town around it and everything. They own this platform for all these people to, be in, work in, live in. It's a community, right? And that's almost what Facebook kind of is now, to the point. It's so big and so encompassing. You have businesses inside of Facebook, channels of communication. Events are hosted through there. People use it as a means to communicate with one another and conduct all sorts of manner of business and social gatherings and whatever it may be. it's become that large. It's no longer just a tiny little fun app where you post pictures of yourself and your friends and whatnot. It's become an entire infrastructure, sort of. And similar to here, you could even argue that it's a company owned town, sort of, because of how many things run through it. And again, I don't know if this would apply or not, but it's an interesting question to ask. It's something to look at when maybe analyzing this, because people are going to argue, well, it's a private company, they have a right to do this. And yes, it is, but when they entice you, with certain things and then the rules aren't clear, it's so muddied right now. It's hard to really. This needs to be discussed and talked about, and need to figure out what exactly the rules are with Facebook. And they brought people on under certain promises and certain things, and then they just do these sweeping bans. It's like there's no checks on what they're doing at all. They can just do whatever the heck they want, whenever the heck they want, at the cost of people that have built entire businesses, right? I mean, these companies go in, like these news companies down in Australia, they're expecting, they've been let into Facebook with this promise of getting their news content out there, and then all of a sudden it's not really working out the way they want, and all of a sudden, bam, banned across the board, no questions asked. So the power of these companies is just absolutely incredible with what they control. And with how it is right now, it's incredibly risky to run your entire business or most of your business through one of these companies, which unfortunately that is the way a lot of things need to be done now, because it's hard to get stuff out or be found or discovered without these companies. I understand, but it is incredibly dangerous to work with them, because at the drop of a hat, I mean, you could just be wiped out, banned, gotten rid of altogether. I don't think it's the last we're going to see of these. I mean, Facebook's been in hot water before, but we never really seem to get anywhere with it. Again, something that we need to look into with these companies, because it's probably only going to get worse. Again, they're testing the waters here to see, how far can we go with this without receiving, too much. So far, we give them small little slaps on the wrist, but nothing severe. And if they can get away with banning an entire country and banning an entirely, section of content from a country, it's only going to get a lot worse from there if they can get away with that. All right, so that pretty much does it for all of today's segments. If you guys watched on YouTube, I thank you for tuning in to all of these today. If you listen on audio, again, thank you for tuning into the podcast. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, just leave them down below. I'll try to read as many as I can and get to them. And if you want to check out any news articles that we actually put out in written format, you can check out hunterburdett.com. I'll leave a link down in the description. You can find the link on the profile anywhere. Post the articles regularly. Other than that, stay tuned for more content, more segments. We'll see you next time.